I'm Monica Justice, Vice President of Impact 100. I'll be joined today by Juwan Bennett and John Pace, Reentry Coordinators at YSRP, Youth Sentencing and Reentry Project. YSRP is a 2019 Impact 100 $100,000 grantee. Our thanks to them for making time for us during these challenging times. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank our Impact 100 grant champion, Abby Spector, for helping to organize this event and for securing YSRP's participation today. Thank you as well to Katie Barnett, the Director of Operations for YSRP, for her hard work to make today happen. Most of you have been on enough Zoom calls by now to know how this goes. You'll be muted until the end of our program. Your video can be on or off, although we do love to see you. This program is also being recorded so that we can share it with those who can't be here today. Also, we invite you to ask your questions in the chat as they occur to you so that we can learn even more from our speakers during the Q&A period. When you type your questions in, please just make sure to indicate which panelist your question is for. We'll get to as many of them as we can during our Q&A before the program ends. Now, before I introduce our guest panelists, I would like to just take a second to remind you that this is the important time of year when we ask women to join and be part of our collective giving circle. Simply put, the more members we have by our December 1st deadline, the more support we can give our community. We pool our money, $1,150 each, or half of that for women under 36. And collaboratively, we decide where our funds have the greatest impact. In June, we gave $472,000 to 6 nonprofits that were meeting urgent needs in Philadelphia and the 4 surrounding counties. We are very grateful to our 2020 and 2021 co-presidents, Carolyn Ashburn and Suzanne Wilcox, and Madge Rothenberg, who managed all of the changes required by the pandemic and steered Impact on a course that allowed us to remain faithful to our mission. We acknowledge the efforts of both the membership and grants team who have been able to pivot in the age of COVID to address the needs of our members and grantees simultaneously. Although the FACs were able to meet first in person and then virtually in 2020, the many changes necessitated by COVID made site visits beyond impacts and our applicants' capabilities in the spring. We did, however, recognize their great value. As we head into our new 2021 grant cycle, we want to assure members that we will have virtual site visits with our applicants this year. When this call is over, we want you to go to our website, impact100philadelphia.org, to join us and to find a list of our grantees and learn more about why Impact's membership is so valued. We are also holding an information session via Zoom on November 17th at 6 p.m. for anyone interested in learning more about membership in Impact 100. It is now my great pleasure to introduce our special guests from YSRP Reentry Coordinators, Juwan Bennett and John Pace. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Monica, for having us, and we are excited to be here today. I know John is taking himself off of mute now.
Yes. I was saying thank you, Monica, and it's really a pleasure for us to be here today.
Well, we are just so happy to have you here. John, I'd love to start with a question for you. Just can you give us a little background? How was YSRP formed?
Okay, again, we are very honored to be here today to be able to share the work that we are doing. And so I would like to begin by saying, my name is John Pace, and I am one of the reentry coordinators at the Youth Sentencing Reentry Project. We want to thank y'all for allowing us to be able to share the work that we are doing at YSRP with the Intergenerational Healing Circle, and for your generous support of the work that we've been doing. So the question you asked, how was YSRP formed? YSRP was officially formed in 2014 by Lauren Fine and Joanna Vista Adjourn, 2 young women lawyers who recognized the inadequate representation, services, and support that many marginalized children received when they unfortunately found themselves encountering the adult criminal justice system. They also recognized that there was flaws over a long period of time that resulted in Philadelphia being ground zero for a number of children being sentenced to life without the possibility of parole and serving decades in prison, which is why you might hear the term juvenile lifers. And so, and I'll just take this moment to really spotlight the value of them and how it personally, impacted me. In 1985, I unfortunately found myself involved in the criminal justice system at the age of 17. And I didn't have someone like YSRP to be there to be able to support me and provide mitigation. And unfortunately, it resulted in me being sentenced to life without the possibility of parole and serving 31 years in prison. And so I've been released now for going on 4 years. And so just demonstrating the value of YSRP, being able to be there and to provide the support that wasn't there, that was there now for many of the young people that they're able to assist. And so it wasn't there at one particular time until YSRP came into existence. So YSRP was founded because Joanna and Lauren and we believe that children do not belong in adult jails and prisons. We believe that juvenile lifers deserve to come home and live full lives with dignity. We also believe that the justice system has failed to provide youth with an adequate chance to be seen as individuals with strength, deep resilience, and challenges who are capable of transformation and much more than the serious charges they face. So our work is grounded in partnership with court-involved youth and juvenile lifers and their families and lawyers to develop holistic and humanizing narratives that mitigate the facts of each case, and to eventually get those cases transferred to the juvenile court, because oftentimes what happens is they start in adult court, but the goal is to get them transferred to the juvenile system, or in juvenile lifers' case, to have resentencing and making crucial connections. So after that, getting those resentencing, we also want to make crucial connections to the community, resources such as education, healthcare, housing, and employment. As a part of what we do, and particularly me and Juwan's role is, we remain connected to the youth and juvenile lifer client partners throughout their incarceration and their return home to the community. So YSRP seek to provide opportunities for young people charged as adults to thrive. And I will probably talk a little bit more about that, about thriving. And to create bridges to needed support services and connections for youth and juvenile lifers released from incarceration. And perhaps Juwan probably want to share a little bit more, even though he is relatively new, but he probably want to share a little bit more though.
Yeah, I'm just sharing my screen here now, John. And I just want to reiterate the sentiments. We're so honored and privileged to be here. And before yesterday, I was the newest member of YSRP. I see Sophia Peak on the call. And just to kind of illustrate what John has already kind of talked about, one of the things you'll notice is YSRP is we have a holistic model that combines really these three elements. We talk about sentencing and mitigation. And so what John was talking about when he didn't have YSRP, one of our main priorities is to make sure that when a young person who finds themselves with adult charges, that our supervising attorneys, that our reentry coordinators are presenting a holistic portrait to the judge, that we can make sure that, and sometimes we're successful in getting those cases sent back to the juvenile justice system. In the unfortunate event that a young person does have to spend some time incarcerated at a community placement, state placement, or even an adult system, the supervising attorneys, as well as John and myself, we provide support through their incarceration experience. And mostly importantly, one of the things that I loved about YSRP and drew me to the work is that when that young person returns back into the community, or that juvenile lifer returns back to the community, we stay a part of their lives and their reentry experiences as however long they would like us to be there. And we provide various different supports as it relates to employment, mental health, housing, and really just checking in with them to see how they're doing as they're transitioning back. Our goal really is to really make sure that we are diverting as many cases as possible from the adult system down to the juvenile system. And then once individuals have successfully transferred out of the juvenile system, to make sure that we are providing them with community supports, opportunity, and resources. You may be asking yourself, why is this important? And what is the context of what we're grounding our work in? And what you'll find across the nation, nationally, we come to understand that over 80% of youth are tried as adults nationally throughout our nation. And most of those children will be children of color. Specifically as it relates to the context in Philadelphia, we know that that number is almost closer to 90%. So there's a really pressing need to really understand and to really to provide services and supports to this special population. And not to add insult to injury, but we know that Black youth are sentenced, as it relates to juvenile lifers, are sentenced to life without parole at a rate that's almost 10 times the rate at youth. And to kind of give you a larger picture of the juvenile lifer context, what we have known is that Philadelphia County is responsible for incarcerating more children than anywhere else on earth. So the United States is the only developed nation that actually sentenced children to life without parole. And we know that 300 of those individuals were sentenced here in Philadelphia. Pennsylvania is the state that has incarcerated the most juvenile lifers, 500 plus are statewide. And throughout the country, 2,000 juvenile lifers have been sentenced. And the majority of those states make up Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Louisiana. So this is just some context about our work, why it's important, and some of the needs that we are addressing.
Excellent. Thank you, Juwan. So I'd love for maybe both of you, but John, can you tell us a little bit more about how did you come to the work personally and professionally? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. So as I said, I was incarcerated for 31 years. And while incarcerated, I was deeply involved with a number of organizations and programs while monitoring the United States Supreme Court decision concerning children being sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. A number of us at Greater Ford, which is now Phoenix Prison, located near Philadelphia, decided to start a group called Juvenile Lifers for Justice while we were incarcerated. We would often meet a number of outside organizations advocating for juvenile justice and opportunities for children who were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, and for the opportunity to be resentenced. So while doing this work, I was able to meet Lauren and Joanna, as they would often come to the prison and provide us with updates on rulings from the court. And they would also conduct workshops to solicit from us our thoughts about things that we thought were most pressing for us. But more importantly, we were able to develop they were able to develop a partnership with us around criminal justice reform as it pertained to children being sentenced to life without the possibility of parole and the potential for being resentenced. It was during this time that I particularly came across an article about in a newspaper, or I think it was called Legal Intelligenta, because I worked in a law library. And I came across this article about a new organization being started called the Youth Sentencing Reentry Project. After reading the article, I immediately said, this is a perfect organization that I could really utilize my experience. So I decided to write Joanna and Lauren just to congratulate them for starting an organization. And I also shared with them that I could really see myself doing this kind of work. So once I came home, Lauren and Joanna came to visit me and we went out to eat. And then immediately after that, I started organizing the juvenile lifers and trying to build community, because one of the things that was important to us was, we remember a few years ago, there was a guy that got out in the 90s, and unfortunately he went out and recommitted some heinous crimes. And so one of the things was important to us was that we didn't want to see this happen. So we wanted to build support amongst each other. And we wanted to help each other as we navigate back into the community. So I subsequently began to work for YSRP in November 2017 as the Juvenile Lifer Reentry Coordinator at that time, supporting juvenile lifers returning home or from their transition back to the community. And so, just because of the fact that it was decades, you can imagine, how the world had changed for many of us who had served 20, 30, 40, close to 50 years, one guy serving over 60 years. And we knew that this was going to be really traumatic for a lot of people as they transition back to the community. And so my role was to help them transition back to the community. And so this is how I came to the work.
Awesome.
And yeah, to piggyback off what John said, is my story is a little bit different, but also interesting. So I come to the work really two ways. One, through the grant that we received from Impact 100 to really be the lead facilitator for the Intergenerational Healing Circle. But before I tell the story, I want to kind of go back a little bit in time, a little bit further. But I came to the work special YSRP actually through John Pace. This year, I'll be finishing a doctorate degree in criminal justice at Temple University. But when I was still wet behind my ears and still in my infancy stages, I had the opportunity to be a part of the Inside Out program. So Temple University was the first college university to take college students and then have them learn through lived experience with individuals in jails and prisons. And so I knew John when he was incarcerated at Grateford Prison, and he was just very intriguing. And I wanted to know more, and he took me kind of on his wing, and we would meet every Wednesday night. And I would try to tell my family, my friends, when I would leave the prison, I would call them, but it would sound like mumbo jumbo because I couldn't really express to them all the things that we'd accomplished in our 2-hour time period. And I remember saying to him one night, man, it would be so great if all the programs and all the things that we're doing behind bars, if we could do them out in the community. And he said, it's interesting that you said that because actually I will be leaving soon. And I said, oh, come on, stop playing. Like, what is this? And he says, no, I'm a juvenile lifer. And I did not know what a juvenile lifer was. And so the next time I came back to the prison at our Wednesday meeting, John was not there because he was transitioning to come home. And one of the DOC rules, Department of Correction rules, if you're a volunteer, you cannot have contact with people in the inside. So I did not know. I knew I would eventually see him, but I didn't know when. I didn't have his number. I didn't know any of his family members. And I remember it like it was yesterday because it was February 27, 2017 was the day that I had planned to propose to my wife. And as I begin to get on one bended knee, I hear somebody from the far say, Juwan, and I'm looking around and I see John, but I guess my brain wouldn't let me recognize that it was John because I just couldn't imagine that he was out. And I said, what are you doing down here? He said, I'm getting my ID. And I said, oh man, I'm so glad I ran to you because so many things I'm thinking about. And he says, I want to work with young people. I want to do everything we was doing inside. He says, what are you doing downstairs? I said, well, I just proposed to my wife. And so John often sometimes forgets the date because he was let out of prison a week earlier, but I have to remind him about February. And my wife reminds him that it was February 27th because it was the day we proposed. Fast forward, John calls me and says that he has an opportunity that YSRP wants to work with young people and they want to bridge the gap and also have juvenile lifers to talk about their incarceration experience and how they're rebuilding to the community. And he says one of the things that they are trying to do, they really want to have this idea of healing, and they don't want it to be, a mentorship or people talking down to the young people, but a collaborative space. And he asked me if I was interested. And I said, I'm interested in doing anything that you want to do, because really the Intergenerational Healing Circle is really a motif or a model of our relationship. Me and John have known each other almost for 6 or 7 years, and we have benefited from both being from Philadelphia. We have benefited from each other's story and the intergenerationalness of our discussions. And that's what we were really trying to replicate. And so the grant from Impact 100 really allowed to do this. And just to kind of provide a brief overview of the intergenerational healing circles, given kind of the circumstances that we find ourselves in, especially amidst the global pandemic, police brutality, racial divides, and civil unrest, it becomes critically important to build a community, an intergenerational community, especially for those who have a lived experience, because there are limited safe spaces for individuals to engage. I remember when I was a little boy growing up, there were Black men who would go to the barbershops, who would play chess at the park. And because of the pandemic and given our interesting political climate in Philadelphia, we don't have those spaces anymore. And so to create those spaces for people, especially who youth who've been in the adult system. If you think about it, they have Alcoholic Anonymous, they have Narcotics Anonymous, they even have spaces for veterans to talk about their particular experiences. But when you look at the context of people who go through a traumatic experience, especially incarceration, there are no experience where people can meet up and talk about. So that's what the intergenerational, and we had some pretty much goals. Our goals are really to share information about each participant's reentry journeys and learning from the experiences of others, but also building collective power through the analysis of individuals with lived experience in the criminal justice and as citizens of Philadelphia. And most importantly, which is in line with our values, we wanted to develop agency, including a deepening self-awareness and the capacity for liberation-oriented leadership.
Awesome. Thank you, Juwan. I'm curious, you mentioned a little bit about COVID-19 and the impact that it's had. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your work has changed and what's different for people who are incarcerated and people who are home in the community? Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, so our work has changed dramatically. So when we received the Impact 100 grant, we had one in-person meeting. And so what we were trying to do, we were trying to build this community of juvenile lifers and young people. And we didn't know how it was going to go. And the first meeting went very well. It was a deep sigh of relief. And we said, oh my goodness, we have something here. We have some gold. We got some news the next week that I think that meeting was in February and March, that the pandemic hit. And that, so we had to figure out, well, how we were going to build this community. Some things that we said that we want to do, that we want to, visit certain places. We wanted to develop people's agency and leadership. So we wanted to connect different individuals. And so, well, how are we going to do that? And so they said they had this new thing called Zoom. And when you got onto the Zoom, you could share it. You can go out to breakout rooms. And so we had to do a quick learning kind of curve. And so our main priority goals was really, how do we talk about healing? How do we build power? How do we share connectedness? And how do we build community? And so what we did through Zoom, we tried as much as possible to build this community. And so we had guest speakers, people from the congressional office talk about voting and the importance of voting. We had the community contributors Ezra from WHYY speak. The IGC is doing a podcast on gun violence. And we just wrapped up a recording with an organization called Unchained Stories. And so what the work has allowed us to do, even though we were limited to in-person, it allowed us to be innovative, because what we saw was that people needed a community to come to, even more importantly, in the COVID-19 era. And I know John wanted to share any just new additional insights or nuances.
I think at the when I think about, like, ultimately what we were trying to get at is trauma. We were trying to get at, because we recognize that we dealing with two populations, particularly young folks and the older ones who did significant more time, that both of them had shared experience, which was trauma. And so we wanted to explore that. And so what we did is we had a number of sessions that dealt with that trauma, and we were able to do this through Zoom. Juwan did a wonderful job in terms of creating workshops in which we could really have deep conversations about these things. But we didn't want to stay in a place of, okay, we went through this trauma and that's it. We wanted to think about how do we transition out of that? And so we did a number of sessions about how to build power, to give yourself that utilize that resiliency that you had inside of you that allow you to overcome those challenges that you've already come through. And so we had a number of sessions in that way. And then we ultimately wanted to talk about agency. How do you utilize your agency? And so we had a number of sessions. When you talk about those speakers, guest speakers that came, the guest speakers spoke to that. We had one particular guest who he was going through how he was able to develop his voice. And then another speaker that came through to say, okay, once you develop your voice, this is a way in which you can utilize that experience. And so I think we wanted to make sure that individuals had outlets, that not just to be, you explored the trauma and that's it. We wanted to think about ways in which they could really, I think I used the term thrive, ways in which they could thrive.
That's great.
That's where we wanted to get at. And we were able to do it successfully in despite of COVID-19.
Thank you, John.
Yeah,
oh yeah, go ahead, Juwan.
No, I was saying, Monica, really quickly, just so people can kind of see, here are some we had a outdoor socially distant event in the summer, and these are some of the young men and juvenile lifers. And it was really important because when we were talking outside, we were asking people, what keeps you coming back? What are some of the challenges? What do you get from some of the group? And some of the young people said, sometimes when you're dealing with a particular problem, it may seem larger or big. And then in the context, to understand that some of these men were lifers, were never supposed to get out of prison, and to understand how they handle adversity and understand that they're smiling. He said, that helps me to guide. And so we asked some of the juvenile lifers, what are you getting from the experience? What are some challenges which you keep coming back? And they said to constantly, that transitioning is a continual process, and to understand how the young people can help them out with their technology, figure out what Zoom is, and for them to sharpen their skills as well. And so this is really the learning, the cyclical learning process about how both generations not only impact one another, but also learn and share and grow with one another.
Can I say just one last thing on that? Because I think this conversation that we had that particular day, it was so profound because all of it, and it was across the board, that the juvenile lifers and the youth client partners were talking about the residual effects of being confined, that trauma. They were talking about how, they were institutionalized and they're still working through those things. And so just to allow themselves to be vulnerable and talk about that was, I think, a profound conversation that we had on that particular day.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. That amazing. And I'd love to transition and talk a little bit about your, you're a racial justice organization. As a racial justice organization, what are your organization's values and how do you operationalize them? You've kind of touched on them just a little bit in how you work and what you're bringing to these meetings with folks, but tell us a little bit more about your values and how you bring those values to life.
Yeah, this is a subject I love talking about because I just love the fact that we are an organization that recognize the history and the trauma that comes from that history. Not that that's a good thing, but we are aware of it. So as a racial justice organization, we recognize the multiple systems that attack our client partners, particularly our country's long history of racial injustices and its legacy of slavery. Many of these systems have created conditions that have perpetuated a great deal of harm on our client partners and, in fact, trauma. So as an organization, we hope to undo some of these harms to our client partner. And so in doing that, well, one of the things that's been important to us is recognizing the individuality of individuals and recognizing their sense of agency and self-determination. And I will say something personal again, because me being confined, I knew how these things were taken away. When you're confined in prison, when you're confined in these systems that are attacked, that individuality or that agency, you don't get to utilize these things. And so as an organization, these things are extremely essential to us to recognize that, that the individuals are individuals and that they do have agency and that they do have self-determination, even as we want to support them, but they still have self-determination. And so this is so important to us as an organization. What we attempt to do is we try to connect our client partners with opportunities that they might not have had prior to their contact with the criminal justice system. And one of the ways in which we've been doing that is the IGAC. This is why the IGAC is so important, is that we're able to create space in which we try to connect the youth client partners and the juvenile lifers to be able to build that power of their resiliency and, frankly, to help them deliberate their own, help them to liberate themselves individually, and collectively. And so this is the process of allowing them to be able to explore that within themselves and recognize that agency. And so our values is what guide us through many of these relationships. And this is why I think when you heard me say at the very beginning about when we partner with our client partners, we partner with their family members, because it is a partnership. It is not us coming in and saying, you know, let me do this for you because we think we know what's best for you. It's about, okay, what do you think we could do for you or support you in? And so that's the partnership that we try to provide our client partners. And the IGAC just really, I think, amplifies that.
Yeah, it's so evident in listening to you how your values are just embedded in everything you do. Juwan, I'd love to hear from you about the vision for the organization. So the vision for your work going forward. What's next? How do you guys see that?
Yeah, so basically, I'm sure my Zoom is acting a little crazy here, but this is a picture from our Montgomery party really here, and so every year the juvenile lifers, we bring them together in the community to really celebrate the Supreme Court decisions that really recognize children should not be incarcerated in the adult experience, and to really kind of piggyback what John said previously. We understand, especially in an academic sense, that these individuals were labeled as super predators. They were thought as not having any benefit to society. And so we're really intentional about the language we use. And, it's really hard to talk about the values after John because he is so passionate. He will often remind us that we need to go back. And so I have downloaded these because we really want to do some of this harm. But I think the vision moving really forward as an organization is to undo some of these harms. I came to the work really to work with juvenile lifers, to work with young people. And as I'm finishing up a dissertation, it's interesting that the study that I'm conducting is for the last 30 or 40 years, we have not actually heard from the voices or the lived experience of formerly incarcerated people. And so other people have told their stories, other people had thoughts and opinions about their stories, but we haven't used that. And so the grant from Impact 100 is really great to really push our vision forward, because as we help individuals develop and grow and gain a sense of aging for themselves, they can tell their own stories. They can then inform us what we should do. And also at a broader level, what we want to do as an organization moving forward is to really help people get proximate into these issues. And so these issues sometimes are not black or white. Like I like to tell my students a lot of time, there's a lot of gray areas. And no matter how you feel about our current criminal justice system, whether it needs to be changes, where you think it needs to stay the same, only when we get to a particular issue that brings forth growth and transformation. So working with young people, building relationships, and working with each other across difference. And also, as we get proximate to these issues and begin to understand them further, as there are many layers and many levels, then as an organization, we can move forward. Our vision is to effectively think about the changes that we need to make, or policy advocacy to dismantle some of the systemic racism that we see.
That's great. So Juwan, how could the folks who are joining us on this call today, how can they continue to uplift the work and the vision of YSRP?
That is a great question. First of all, I want to tell everybody that you can go to our website, which I'm about to post here, ysrp.org, and you can sign up for our email list so we can stay in touch. At YSRP, we are very strategic about not just networking with individuals and making it transactional, but this idea of relationship building. We want to build relationship with people, become intimately involved in other people's organizations as they involve in us. But most importantly, how can people joining us continue to uplift our work is that the people that we work with, our youth client partners, as well as our juvenile lifers, one of the big nuggets or one of the domains that we're interested in is employment. And so people know employers in their networks, young people as well as adults who want to work, who are willing to work. So it'd be awesome if people could reach out to us. They know employers in the workforce. And most importantly, if people can just share our story, like John said in our pre-call while we're in the waiting room, YSRP is still in its infancy stages. We are still learning, and so the more that people know about us, the more people know about our message and what we are doing to address this problem is also good prep for us, but also for us to build and see where those synergies align so that we can move the work moving forward.
Yeah, and I would just add one last point to that. I think just to amplify the point that Juwan, it's about resources, so, as we recognize, this self-determination and this agency among our client partners, we want to connect them to resources. And so as individuals learn more about the work that we do and see some of the resources that we could potentially utilize to help support them, whether it's educational, healthcare opportunities, housing issues, or employment opportunity, we would greatly appreciate individuals who are willing or capable of being able to support us in those areas.
Thank you both so much for this conversation. We've learned so much so far. And at this point, I'd like to go ahead and open up our discussion to the audience. We do have a few questions coming in already. So you guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're ready.
Awesome. Okay, so what do each of you see as the biggest challenges just for the coming year? For example, number of youth cases, changes in the justice system, COVID-related issues. Maybe each of you speak to that biggest challenges for the coming year.
I think one of the biggest challenges for the coming year, there's been no surprise that we have an upsurge in violence in Philadelphia. And so for the biggest challenge for us, I think, is for us to really think about how do we make sure, obviously the Intergenerational Healing Circle, it's a very intimate group. And so we're having conversations about how do we maybe expand that work or work with other organizations to create healing circles. This week, got a call from Mothers in Charge. They found out that the work we were doing with Intergenerational Healing Circle, they asked us how we were formed. We told them we got this grant from Impact 100, and they are now putting a grant themselves to create trauma-informed spaces around the city. So one of the things that we're going to deal with and tackle really important is that we have an upsurge of violence and in our community, especially Philadelphia context, and the majority of those men are young Black men. And so there's going to be a lot of concern for healing and to create these trauma-informed spaces. And so we are thinking critically that now this was kind of our pilot. We were forming the IGC. Now we know what it is and the power of it. How do we continue to move the work in the new year? And how do we begin to address some of the hurt and harm that our client partners, as well as juvenile lifers, may face due to the upsurge in violence in the Philadelphia context?
Yeah, and I'll probably just echo that somewhat. I think obviously COVID-19 is a hindrance to a certain degree, because I believe building relationships, proximity is so important, getting close up, being able to see people, and that, so I think that's extremely important. So we just don't know how long this is going to be, but obviously we've been able to manage it so far. But I think one of the things a young person said this week, me and him were paired up together as we told our stories. And what was important to him was he wanted to take the intergenerational healing circuit outside of just us. He thought it was that important that he wanted to see it expand into some of the young people that he encountered in his community. And so how do we begin to do that? Yeah. I think that's a potential challenge, because obviously we want to be able to reach as many people as possible. And so we had a big organizational conversation about how do we spread our model, because we can't be everywhere, So when we're thinking about that, how do we continue to expand the work that we do to others,
right,
that we can reach more people?
Awesome. Well, John, can you pick up on that a little bit? So can you talk a little bit more about the connections you make for youth to other social services, and how do you stay connected to the youth, right? So this challenge of we want to expand, but tell us a little bit more, and this is the question, what are the connections you make now and how do you stay connected with them?
Yeah. So one of the things we do is we call vet. We vet organizations. And that means that any organization that we might connect our youth client partners up to, or the juvenile lifers up to, we feel comfortable with that organization. We've evaluated their values, and we thought that their values, for the most part, align with our values. And so when we connect them to them, we're trusting that they're going to do the right thing with, the client partners that we're connecting with. But because of the relationships that we built with our youth client partners, and that's part of what the work that me and Juwan do as reentry coordinator, we built relationships. That's what it's all about. And so really, we don't never depart from that. We just connecting them up to, because we don't have that level of resources like that. but we connected them to resources, but we still have a relationship with them.
Right.
And so that's how we stay connected with them, where they're still constantly in communication with us, but they're connected to a resource. Excellent. And so really it's about the relationship that we develop with our youth client partners.
Great. And that vetting process sounds so important.
Yeah.
Okay, this next one is a very broad question. And they say, why does Philly try so many children in the adult system? What's different about our system that accounts for such huge numbers? Can you speak to that?
I can take it on, but I let you go first, Juwan.
Yeah, I think Philadelphia is a very interesting context. I think I'll speak from an academic perspective, John, and you can speak from a more lived experience. We know that John DeLulio, who was a Penn professor, he was the individual who predicted that during the late 80s, early 90s, that we saw Black mothers upsurge in crack cocaine usage, and we saw juvenile crime rates at an ultimate high. And he was the one who came with the super predator debate, even though later he said that he was wrong in his predictions. John DeLulio was a social demographer, people who use population trends to predict things, future outcomes. Even though he later said that there's no evidence for it, people still ran with it. And so I think it's challenging now, given the times that we're in now, in 2020, where we see juvenile crime rates increasing as well, to then have a deeper level. But I think, particularly to Philadelphia, the reason why, and I can talk more about this if people have more questions offline, but the reason why I think we see in Philadelphia so much, purely from an academic standpoint, is because John DeLulio was based here. He was an advisor to the president here, and he was the one who crafted this language, which then we applied to all the how we think about juveniles. I like to tell my students, criminal justice is a very politicized discipline, and what you have to know about criminal justice was really interesting, really short, quick bit, is that criminal justice, until the 1980s, you couldn't even get a degree in criminal justice. It was not a degree field. And so it is a very, very new discipline. And so how we think about criminal justice is always shaping, morphing. Sociology was the queen discipline. We think about philosophy, chemistry. These things have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. Criminal justice is new, and a lot of that is shaped by politics.
Yeah, and I would just add, just very briefly, I think it goes back to some of the things we talked about in terms of the disregard for Black lives, the history and the impact of many of the traumas that have had on marginalized communities. And I say that to say that because oftentimes we see young people of color that's predominantly are the ones that's in the criminal justice system. And John DeLillo was just a part of it. And I don't think it's limited to Philadelphia. I think it's much broader than Philadelphia. I think it's across the nation that you see this with a lot of young people in marginalized communities. And just one example of that, why did Philadelphia have the largest number of children sentenced to life without the possibility of parole? And particularly, they were predominantly people of color. And so it was because they treated them just like adults. There was no regard for them as young people. And so what happened, the court had to intervene and say, no, children are different. But Philadelphia had, or Pennsylvania had laws that when they charge you as an adult, you got the same kind of punishment. There was no regard for the fact that you were a young person, and that all the flaws that come with being a young person that you go through, that was not considered at all. And that's what part of mitigation does. That's what YSRP does in terms of mitigation, is to bring these things out.
And John, just to piggyback off that point, there are 3 great books if people are interested: Child Savers, Black Child Savers, and there's a new New York Press book called Presumed Criminals. From a academic standpoint, the United States, our society has always struggled when Black boys become Black men. So the adultification of Black boys and Black girls. So there's really 3 good books that really talk about this idea about the struggle for people to assume. And Anne Ferguson, she writes a book called Bad Boys, when she talks about from the educational sense of how even Black educators have seen young Black men, Black boys as men in the educational context as well.
Excellent. Thank you for those resources, Juwan. Appreciate that. And hopefully we'll be able to put the names of those books in the chat for everybody, or share them afterward. Juwan, question for you here. How many people are involved in the Intergenerational program, IGAC?
So the Intergenerational Healing Circle comprises of 4 juvenile lifers, and 4 youth client partners. So we have 4 dyads, and then John and myself. Okay. And we also have a co-facilitator. His name is Dr. Gene Wright, and he's a mental health professional. He's over the Department of Behavioral Health, and he provides workshops and training as it relates to the healing component of the circle.
Excellent, thank you. And then this next question is for either one of you. Are there women in your program? And if so, how do you include them in your work?
Yeah. And that's so interesting. There are no women in the intergenerational healing circle, but that's something that we are looking forward into the new year, knowing that women and girls are now the fastest growing prison population. And just as men, young men and older men need healing, women need healing as well. And so I think we are beginning to think about that as well.
Yeah, and we do, as an organization, we do have a few women who were sentenced as children to life without possibility of parole. That two particular client partners, one passed away unfortunately last year, but we have 3 of them. 3 of the women we try to be working with them, trying to let them explore. We don't want to think about like same intergenerational healing. What do they want? And so we've been in a conversation with them and exploring what could we support them in as well.
Excellent, thank you. So this next one is for either one of you again. So what are some of the priorities today to help traumatized young people in our city to have hope and move forward with resilience?
I think some of the priorities really are just providing those opportunities. I think young people really need those opportunities to have that particular hope. And a lot of our youth client partners, we understand is that, and this goes back to one of our core values, and I know John will be proud of me about this because I'm really trying to implement this, is that we believe that multiple systems attack our young people. And so once a young person finds themselves ensnared in the criminal justice system, it becomes very difficult for them to begin to repair their particular lives, and those opportunities become diminished. And so, for example, we have a young man that is on, well, he's really on John's caseload, but we share him now, and he's been so resilient. But sometimes the court would like to see some young people on house arrest. Sometimes they have some restrictions. And so when we are trying to find employment or educational opportunities, we often have to work with other systems who may not have the same timeline or priorities as we have. And so one of the things we're prioritizing is really to find those opportunities and really redo those harm, knowing that there are multiple systems that attack our young people. And that's why it's really so important for us to relationship building, to relationship with the probation officers, to have relationship with the parole officers, to have relationships with employers, to have relationship with mental health professionals, because you don't go through the traumatic experience of prison as a child and come out as a normal person. And so there are a lot of things that we have to do, and there's a lot of layers that we have to remove so youth can take hold of those opportunities and not just survive, but like as John say, thrive and have agency over their own lives.
Yeah, and I would just add, that it's really to uplift their resilience. You know, despite the multiple systems that are attacking them, that to uplift their resilience, that they've been able to make it through that environment with all these systems attacking them. And so to me, I think that goes a long way, being able to support them through that, because, and I think this is why the Intergenerational Healing Circle is so important, to create that space for them where they can explore the traumas that they're going through, because they don't oftentimes have that space in which they can talk about that. When they're amongst peers who are going through the same trauma, they feel afraid to talk about these things. But the Intergenerational Healing Circle provides that space for them to explore it, where they can recognize that I made it. And I don't have to feel uncomfortable about sharing that I made it. And then I can help somebody else, because that's the goal. The goal is to allow them to begin to help other people who are in similar situations.
Excellent. Thank you, John. So again, for either of you, what types of mental health resources do you have and do you need?
I think we can always use more. We've built relationships with a few mental health people or professional people that do particular work, but we can always use more. But we have, that's a part of vetting. We go out and we try to identify a resource. Me and Juwan, or actually I would say Juwan probably more than me, because he's developing the spreadsheet, dealing with all the different resources now. But we're trying to build as many resources as possible that we can make referrals when we see client partners that are going through these particular issues. But we have a number of them, but we still need more. That's part of what can people do?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And to John's point at YSRP, one of our core values is that we don't like to put children into check boxes. Everyone on our caseload is individualized. And so we don't have like 2 programs that we just say, we got 2 mental health programs. Okay, we're sending people to these 2 cases. I'm a musician. I'm a classically trained French horn player, was the principal French horn player in the Kimball Center Youth Orchestra. And what I find now is that a lot of the young people in our caseload, they may not want to go to maybe a friend's hospital or may not want to go to a city agency for mental health, but they will participate in art therapy, or whether that be dancing or playing music instruments. And so now we are trying to find ways where people, I call them now therapeutic outlets, even though people are still getting therapy, but they don't see it as therapy or just sitting on a couch. And so what John is saying is so true, because all of, whether it be employment to housing to mental health, all of our services are individualized to that youth. And so it's not as if we just have one great resource and we send all of our participants here. We want to make sure that the resources is tailor-made and that we're not just getting them off the rack.
Excellent. I mean, that's just amazing. It's kind of this, the whole person and really finding the right fit for the need. That's fantastic. So I want to switch to the next question. So first of all, I did just want to let everybody know that the values can be, actually, Emily let everybody know where your values can be found at ysrp.org. And then jumping down to the question, how is the work of the Healing Circle the same or different from social work?
So I'm not a social worker. I actually, so I have a bachelor's degree in sociology and criminal justice. And my goal is, though, or at least I haven't, but I've been so busy since I've been out, but that my goal is eventually go back to school, get my master's in social work. And so when I think of social work, I don't know if I think the Intergenerational Healing Circle I think it's completely different than social work, because this is about collective learning. It's about building power. Where I think of social work, I think it's about, you providing services to help a person identify a certain resource. And the Intergenerational Healing Circle, anyone could bring that. So everyone would be basically social workers, really, because we all helping one another. And so that's what we try to create, the space where it's equal. Everyone comes on equal playing field, and that we all have some value in this space, and we all have something to give. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's completely different than a social worker.
Yeah.
And I think the Healing Circle is different from maybe other programs or maybe other groups, because, the facilitators, myself, it was very heavy on trying to form the group. But once the group was formed, they set their priorities and they set what they want to talk about. And really, the Intergenerational Healing Circle, what you can think about, like I said before, is really just creating that space. So Elijah Anderson writes this book called Cosmopolitan Canopies, and he talks about this idea of where are the spaces where people who have differences can come together and share cultural exchanges with each other. He details it up. He talks about the Reading Terminal is a space where no one owns the space, but there's different cultures that come together and they share. He talks about Rittenhouse, the park at Rittenhouse. And so the IJC is really like one of those cosmopolitan canopies where we have men across age difference, who come from different neighborhoods in Philadelphia, who have served various years, who have very different genders, were raised different. And it's a space where they can come together across differences and have those cultural exchanges and say with things, hey, that experience was the same, that experience was different. And maybe this is how I'm thinking about it, and this made me think about it and glean. So I think it's way different from maybe some other programs, whether it be social work or other groups that have been formed that may deal with formerly incarcerated people. And I think the intergenerationalness is really the key. And I think in our work, even moving forward, we want to be cognizant of that. We need to have multiple perspectives from different generations. And I think all of our work moving forward should be intergenerational.
So there's the intergenerational, there's the cultural, and then I heard a little bit of the give and take, the back and forth of sharing, which is fantastic. Thank you for that clarification. That's great. So another question, does the organization attempt to engage with the police to open up dialogue for change?
I think we just have, and I believe we have one coming up, a task force where we but we encourage young people to participate in that. So I think that there's a task force on, I think, gun violence, and that's connected to, I believe, police officers. And so I think in that way, I think we are engaged. Not organization, we allow our client partners to dictate that in terms of their involvement in it. Okay. But to that extent.
Yeah, and as an organization, I think our primary focus is really dealing with the court system. And so the court has a very difficult time understanding what a child is and presenting the child. And so as an organizationally standpoint, we prioritize that aspect. YSRP is known nationally because of our mitigation and our mitigation experts. And so what we really prioritize and what's our bread and butter is really preparing these reentry report, preparing these mitigation reports. And so whether we are presenting to a judge, any type of court official, law enforcement official that's saying, listen, this child may have done this particular act, but let me present you the holistic part of the child, how he was raised, what his parents were like, what his educational opportunities are. So we present the whole child into that entity.
Excellent. And
sometimes we have difficulty understanding, about children. I think we're recognizing, and those reports kind of really reiterate about the innocence and the need for protections for that particular youth client partner or even juvenile lifer.
Thank you, Juwan. I can't believe it's almost 1 o'clock already. This time flew, and this is a fascinating discussion. And Juwan, we're going to ask if you might be open to putting together a reading list that we could disseminate to the group, because I think there'll be a lot of interest in reading and learning more. Is that something you'd be open to?
Don't threaten me with a good time.
All right.
I love to read. So don't threaten me with a good time.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to have that coming from you. Thank you so much. Thank you both. So thank you, Juwan. Thank you, John, for your time today. Such an interesting discussion. Thank you so much. Before we go, I just want to remind everyone about some upcoming events. On November 17th at 6, there's an information session for women who are interested in membership to Impact 100 Philadelphia. On December 9th, we'll hold our funding celebration to announce our grant pool and to give all members a sneak peek at 2021. And most importantly, our membership deadline is December 1st. And of course, there's no need to wait until December 1st to join or renew. So a link to our website where you can join will be put in our chat. So please reference that if you don't have it. And as we say goodbye, we're going to be unmuted for a big round of applause for our speakers. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Great
Reading list.
I will.